Back at the end of 2019, I was in a Hollow Knight 80% tournament as the 6th seed. To most people's surprise, I ended up getting to Grand Finals, taking out Kaleva, Scurry, Trinomi, and Fireborn on my way there. Unfortunately for me, even though I PB'd in the final race of the tournament, I ended up losing by 0.05 seconds.
This is gonna PB for sure.
I'm not telling you now.
Oh my god!
Ultimately, I wasn't too upset. The race was really hype, and I wasn't expected to get that far at all, so I was overall pretty happy with how I did. Then, when I lost both 106% and True Ending world records around January 2022, I decided to put almost all my focus on 106%, and I figured I'd get back to True Ending around the summer. Unfortunately, it took me a lot longer than I anticipated to finally take 106% world record, as I'd end up getting it on January 1st, 2023. When I announced that I'd finally be returning to grind back up in True Ending, I was told over and over that the way I approached 106% and the game in general wouldn't work anymore. That I can't decide to exclude certain strats, that everyone was too fast to play it safe, and if I wanted to keep up, I'd have to revamp my entire run. I considered this, but decided I would fix a couple of glaringly slower strats I was doing, but continue running the game the way I always had, prioritizing consistency. Finally, in 2023, Chalky Adams' True Ending tournament begins, with a total prize pool of 2,000 Swiss francs, or approximately $2,225. He said he wanted to get more interest in True Ending and have it get pushed forward by more players. And while the total number of entrants wasn't quite as high as the 80% tournament I mentioned before, the competition felt every bit as fierce. Even though Guanqi had world record when the seeds locked, she ended up dropping out of the tournament, leaving me with the number 1 seed. Ultimately, the tournament ended up with Adam accomplishing his goal, with a big wave of runners either starting to run True Ending or drastically improving their PBs over the course of the couple months the bracket would take. Since I ended up with the number 1 seed, I was one of 3 runners to have a first round bye, along with Hyper and Sawayoshi. I anxiously awaited my first opponent, Axel, who beat Polydactyly in the first round. Axel had improved rapidly, starting the tournament with a 111.37 and ending with a 104.54, although he had a 105.48 at this point. Our race began and I started pretty slow, which would seemingly become a theme throughout the tournament. I fell behind by a few seconds on our way to Hornet 1, then lost another 7 to 8 seconds messing up the shade skip by side slashing instead of pogoing, then going into Salubra's hut to reset. Not only did Axel have an 18-second lead when we entered Elder Who's room, I ended up getting an atrocious pattern that caused me to miss about 4 fireballs from teleports, and the lead ballooned to 25 seconds. Then I was worried about having only 2 health for Explosion Pogo, causing me to miss it and lose another 7 to 8 seconds, now behind over 32. I remember being pretty tilted, but confident throughout this race, even with the horrible start. I knew even with all these mistakes and the time losses, I could still pull off a time that was going to be very hard to beat, and tried to just focus on my own run without worrying about what Axel was doing. Over the course of the next few splits, I was able to slowly shrink Axel's lead to 21 seconds, mostly by getting Revicless first try while Axel didn't go for it, as well as a few other saves here and there. The Soul Warrior, Norman, went a lot better for me, and I was less than 6 seconds behind getting Lurian, and that lead stayed around the same until Failed Champion, where Axel took a very unfortunate death, allowing me to get the lead by 40 seconds. I gained another 13 seconds by having a very good Hornet 2 fight, and by this point I felt like I was starting to fall into a groove, and even though I'd bleed a couple seconds in Markoth and Gorb, I ended up with a 1-cycle Umu, whereas Axel couldn't push Umu through the wall on the last nail hit, and then didn't get enough soul before the next damage cycle, ultimately ending up with a 3-cycle fight, growing my lead to a minute and a half. For the rest of the race, I essentially just coasted, knowing that as long as I didn't die, there was a very high chance I took the win. And sure enough, when I was doing the final climb to Radiance with 3 health, I knew I had secured my first race win of the tournament, and the fastest time of the tournament so far, a 104.46, which was a minute and 2 seconds faster than Axel's PB. Overall, I was pretty happy, and I was on to the next race with Stratus.
Round 2. Fight!
About 3 weeks later was my race against my next opponent. Strat had PB'd in his previous round of 104.48, 2 seconds behind my race time from the first round. However, right before our race, Strat was improving rapidly, being on 103 pace a couple days before, so I knew I was going to have to play well in order to beat the future world record holder. I was around 8 seconds behind entering the Elder Who fight, but a horrible fight caused me to fall to 17 seconds behind. Unfortunately for Strat, his Mantis Claw split would go almost as badly as it could go without a death, and afterwards I would have the lead by 12 seconds, a 29-second swing. From here, Strat would gain a bit, shrinking the lead down to about 4 seconds after Lost Kid. But thankfully for me, I would start to pick it up around Failed Champion, because after him and Hornet 2, I was up to around 27 seconds ahead again. From there, we stayed around 30 seconds apart until we entered White Palace, where I had a fairly clean split, building my lead to almost 50 seconds. After that, I just had to avoid a total collapse or a Radiance death to win no matter how well Strat played. And that turned out to be the case as I got the new lowest time in the tournament of 104.19. I was really happy about this run, playing within 30 seconds of PB and beating Strat, who ended up with a 105.12. I was feeling really confident at this point, and knew that it was going to be hard to knock me out of the tournament, since I knew I still had to be beaten twice. Two weeks later, and it was time for the upper bracket finals against the world record holder, Skate King. I kinda got the vibe before the race that Skate wasn't in his best mindset for this. And if you know Skate's early game at all, you'd know just from the first 5 minutes of the race that he was not on his A game. He did start cleaning it up, and got to a 10-second lead in the Gorgeous Husk split. But after nailing the right side Raptor skip, things would spiral for Skate and he'd die picking up the relic, putting him 58 seconds behind. I started coasting for a bit, knowing that if I could just avoid anything drastic, I could probably hold the lead. Skate did start closing the gap a bit, being only 29 seconds behind after Lost Kim. I ended up getting the 1 cycle kill, but Skate led Umu a bit too far from the wall, so we had to settle for a 2 cycle. At this point, the lead grew to just over a minute, but I wasn't able to enjoy this lead for long, since No Eyes gave me a terrible pattern and I ended up dying. I would still be ahead, however, but now it was only 15 seconds. Dying to No Eyes tilted me in the moment, but I definitely regained my composure very quickly and realized I could still win this. We would have a similar Queen's Garden in Deepness, with me only building my lead to around 25 seconds, and as we raced through White Palace, the lead would barely change, with me gaining 2 to 3 seconds over Skate. The Hollow Knight fight would be fairly uneventful, and we entered the Radiance fight about 24 seconds apart, where I knew the only thing that would prevent my win would be a death, as it's unlikely I would lose that much time otherwise. Unfortunately, both of our Radiance fights would go pretty badly, as I died with 104.23 on the timer, and Skate died at 104.25. So now it was a dead even race with just THK and Radiance. We would both have a pretty slow THK, getting the Fountain attack which is pretty slow most of the time in True Ending. Skate would enter the Radiance fight again 14 seconds ahead of me, so I knew I'd have to play risky if I wanted to win without Skate dying again. But, unfortunately for me, I'd get hit twice right before pushing the phase, and then while Skate was finishing the fight, I'd die a second time. This loss would end up being incredibly frustrating, as I knew I had it in my grasp, even after the No Eyes death. I would immediately start grinding even harder, especially making sure I could kill Radiance with a higher success rate. As I prepped and practiced, I kept an eye on who my lower bracket finals opponent would be. Funnily enough, it would be a familiar foe, as Axel had worked his way through the lower bracket to get another chance at me. Unfortunately, the original VOD for the commentary for this race is lost, but Axel and I both had our POVs, so we could recreate the video here. So after a pretty standard start that kept pace with my PB, I ended up missing Explosion Pogo once, falling a bit behind, and since Axel fell in the Dream platforms, we were neck and neck. I would do okay for a bit, staying consistently under 10 seconds behind my PB, but Axel was holding on to his small lead with a tight grip. Unfortunately for him, he was extremely low on Geo, under 440 going into the Spire when the goal is around 500 plus, as well as being very low on health going into the Raptors Pogo. By the time we got to Limb, I would have led by the smallest of margins, although Axel still needed to get 5 Geo in the Crystal Heart split somewhere. He did so pretty quickly, and while I was only ahead by about a second at the Spire bench, the rest of my Chandelier split went much smoother, and I went ahead by 18 seconds. Axel clawed back a couple seconds against my terrible Watcher Knight, but I took them right back on our way down to the basement. And after a couple of mistakes by Axel with the Molochs and Broken Vessel, I found myself 31 seconds ahead entering the Lost Kin fight. Our fights were pretty even, but unfortunately for me, that wouldn't be the case for Failed Champ. I struggled to get double hits or Dream Nails, and Axel ended up cutting the lead to about 22 seconds. After Axel accidentally selected the wrong stack station and failed the acid skip once, I'd enter the Hornet 2 fight 31 seconds ahead with Axel at 3 health. I had a relatively smooth fight, while Axel didn't get the best pattern, resulting in my lead growing to 42 seconds. Axel would continue making mistakes in the next couple splits while I tried to give him no way back into the race, and by the time we headed to Umu, I was a minute and 5 seconds ahead. With Axel desperately needing Umu to provide him a way back in, the worst case scenario would happen for him where I got the 1 cycle kill and he had to settle for 2 cycles, putting me at a minute and 25 seconds. At this point, I finally felt like I could afford to take my foot off the gas, and ensure no big mistakes allowed him to get anywhere close, and by the time we were both supposed to head into White Palace, my lead had grown a little bit to a minute and 32 seconds. But the reason I say supposed to head into White Palace is because Axel accidentally C-dashed right past the King's Bowl and went all the way down into the Abyss, where he then realized he didn't have a completed King Soul yet. He would then quit out and respawn all the way back at Hera, and when he got to Hidden Station, he decided to binge and take off Shaman Stone for some reason, before turning around and re-equipping it, finally back on track to head into the palace. All of this would end up costing Axel almost a minute and a half to balloon my lead to 2 minutes and 53 seconds. I carried this lead all the way into the Radiance fight, where I knew there was a good chance I could probably die and still be a bit ahead. After multiple ridiculously close calls against Radiance, I would finish the race with a 104.16, while Axel would unfortunately die to Radiance and end up with a 109.08. After some GGs and congratulating Axel on making it this far, I'd set my sights on my rematch with Skate. After being ahead for the entirety of our last race until my death to Radiance, I came into this rematch knowing I had a very good shot at pulling this off. Radiance had been a pain in my ass for a bit now, but my determination was at an all-time high and I knew I had the skill to pull it off. And so, finally, we began what could potentially be the last race of the tournament. Things started off pretty standard in the VS split, with me having a tiny lead getting past the first boulder. However, the first big event of the run would happen after one of the craziest commentators' curses of all time.
And not going for the fireball skip at all loses less time than going for it and missing it.
Exactly.
Not that Skip would miss it, but
Right, yeah. Now, coming up to a fireball skip that they have to do, I don't expect any mistakes here. Oh my god,
frame one comms curse.
Oh god, I am ready for the messages in chat saying that I comms cursed Skate. You hate to see it.
This would end up putting Skate 20 seconds behind, which I imagine couldn't have felt good that early into the race. He would keep pace with me for a bit until the Dream platforms, where he would unfortunately fall twice, giving me a 33-second lead in the first quarter of the race. Skate would then seem to spiral for a bit, as his next 2 splits would go extremely poorly, losing a lot of time against Zero and then missing Revicless for about 10 to 15 seconds. By the time we were on our way to Gorgeous Husk, I was 57 seconds ahead. As we approached the boss gauntlet starting with the Norman fight, Skate had clawed back a little bit of time, getting the gap down to 42 seconds, and then continued to chip away at the lead through the Watcher Night fight and base and bench splits. But after doing a pretty good job of holding on to leads in this tournament, disaster would strike as I was a bit too reckless fighting Broken Vessel, putting Skate ahead by 40 seconds.
Viz taking quite a bit of damage. He's got to be careful. Viz.
Oh no!
In this moment, I knew I was in huge trouble. Skate had seemingly stabilized and there wasn't a realistic way for me to win this race without something drastic happening to my opponent. And luckily, I wouldn't have to wait long, as Skate ended up dying to failed champion in one of the strangest and unfortunate ways I've ever seen.
Be careful, he's one hit away from dying. Yeah. Okay, he gets the stat.
Oh no!
Oh no!
I couldn't celebrate for long, because even with my head start, I lost about 7 seconds from the horrible phase 1 against the boss, so we were essentially neck and neck. But as if this part of the race couldn't get any weirder, instead of fireballing the boss one last time to end the fight 2 seconds ahead of me, Skate just jumped off the ledge and out of the dream, meaning he had to start the entire fight over again.
The fight's over, don't. Get this dream gate, yeah. Oh, that way! Oh, no! Skate! Oh my god, Skate, no! He didn't shoot the fireball! Oh my god!
Oh my god, Skate!
And with one last major event here, Skate would then die to the boss again, and when all was said and done, I would end up with a 2-minute lead. Once again, I was in a position that I knew I would just need to slow it down a little bit to make sure I didn't give Skate another chance at this first race. On top of that, Skate was seemingly not playing his best and I was getting into a bit of a groove, even getting the Umu 1 cycle after getting an extra attack, which I'm not super consistent with. My lead would hold and even slightly grow for a couple splits, before Skate would end up dying to frogs, running all the way back instead of dream gating back to the room, and struggling to find his shade before Marmu, putting me ahead by over 4 minutes. The rest of the race would end up being pretty uneventful, with everyone knowing I could probably afford even 2 Radiance deaths and still have a lead, even if Skate started playing extremely well at this point. And given his quote-unquote body language, aka his movement and decisions during certain sections, that was pretty unlikely. I would end the first race with a 105.34, and Skate decided he didn't want to finish, and just get onto the 15-minute break before we do the final winner-take-all race. At this point, I was feeling extremely confident. Given how Skate was acting at the end of race 1, I figured he was extremely tilted and frustrated, and that would make it a lot harder to play at his A game. To my surprise, Skate came out looking like his mental had completely reset, and he showed his skills in early game that we've all come to know him for, gaining a 14-second lead on me in just the first 3 splits. But before he could get too far ahead of me, he would flub the 1 fireball shade skip, one of the worst tricks you can miss, putting him 30 seconds behind. I remember at this point thinking to myself, okay, huge props to him for mentally resetting between races and starting this race off well, but I can't imagine that doesn't tilt him upside down. I should be able to coast from here. And that was reinforced a little bit when Skate fell in the dream platforms, putting me up to 36 seconds ahead. Over the next couple splits, I was keeping an eye on how Skate was doing. I wanted to see how he was playing to know how fast I needed to push myself to keep him at arm's length. And surprisingly, from the Mantis Claw split onwards, Skate wasn't letting me build much on my lead. I quickly realized I wasn't going to be able to let my foot off the gas at all, as there was still plenty of race left for him to close the gap. So, I got back into my groove, had a fantastic Crystal Peaks, Norman, Watcher Knight, and Lostkin, and built my lead to 45 seconds. We both would have a pretty good mid to late game, both getting Umu 1 cycle and decent no-wise, Marmu, and Trader Lord. It seemed like I would save 45 seconds on something, and then Skate would just take it back in the very next split, and we were seemingly locked in a 40-ish second gap. This would be true entering White Palace, where I had a 38 second lead, until Skate would miss the King's Mold skip, with my lead exiting growing to 56 seconds. At this point, there was no way I was going to let him back into this race. I knew I could play ridiculously safe against Radiance and be fine, but even with that, I knew there was a lot of pressure on me to finish it up. And that I did, killing Radiance and finishing the race with a 103.55, the only 103 in the entire tournament, beating Skate's 104.49. This race was extremely important to me, especially with struggling to take record back for a couple months before this point. I knew I'd have to play on my A game to beat Skate with how good everyone knows he is, and I'm really proud of myself for grinding as hard as I did and being able to see the results. Stratus would end up taking record 3 times after the tournament, ending with a 103.04, just shy of the first 102. But then, on June 27, 2023, I would finally take back world record with the first 102 in the category, a 102.57, accomplishing both of my true ending goals. Overall, this was a crazy and exciting time of my life. I showed everyone how consistently fast I can be, immediately followed by being the first to break a 7th minute barrier in true ending. I want to give a huge shout out to Adam for putting together this tournament and getting all of this interest into reviving TE. As well as a shout out to everyone I raced and all the people who participated in the tourney, racers, commentators, and restreamers. And finally, to my community, who constantly cheered me on even when I got down on myself. You guys always made it easier to keep pushing. As for what's next, maybe I still got it in me for the All Skills tournament coming up. For now though, check out my stream, twitch.tv/visualstv, and join the Discord to know what goals I'm chasing next. Thanks for watching.